Today we have Marlene. She is an award-winning author, scholar, and professor specializing in Haitian history and culture. Marlene's most recent book, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe, is a finalist for the Cundill History Prize, which explores the fascinating life of Haiti's only king while delving into the complex history of a 19th century Caribbean monarchy. She has a number of other books and has been widely published in a number of magazines, newspapers, and journalists. There, Marlene, that's where I edited you down. So they're quite extensive lists. She has been a recipient of several awards, grants, and fellowships for her net contributions to historical and cultural understandings of the Caribbean, notably from the Ford Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Haitian Studies Association, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and from the Robert Silvers Foundation for the First and Last King of Haiti. Marlene graduated from Loyola Marymount University with a BA in English and French in 2002, went on to teach in Rouen, France as an assistant d'anglais before enrolling at the University of Notre Dame, where she earned a PhD in English in 2009. Since graduating, she has taught Haitian and French colonial history and culture at the University of Miami, the Claremont Graduate University, and the University of Virginia, where she also became and remained series editor of the New World Studies at UVA Press. In July 2022, she was appointed as Professor of French and Black Studies at Yale University. So please join me in welcoming Marlene.
Good afternoon or evening, I guess I can say now, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Marlene Daut, and I will be talking about my book, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henri Christophe. So I always say that, Christophe is one of the lesser known figures of the Haitian Revolution, but he is not less important. And in fact, in his era, his history was widely known, and he was one of the most popularly portrayed figures of the Haitian Revolution. So, really, that he's not a household name anymore is of more recent date. And so, in coming to this history, I had to contend with all of the past writings about him, particularly from the 19th century, many that sought to defame him because he became a king, and a lot of the sort of mythology that cropped up in the early 20th century, as especially Black writers from the Harlem Renaissance era and from the Caribbean sought to take up his story and portray it on the stage. And so, one of the things I wanted to do was to clear up some of the misconceptions and some of the mythologies about Henri Christophe. And so, I'm going to start from the very beginning because, unlike many subjects one might decide to research, Christophe is someone who has been written about as having multiple birth locations. So, different places I came across in my research were Grenada, which is in the Southern Caribbean and is in fact where Christophe was born, but also Saint Lucia, Saint Vincent, Saint Kitts. Some said Saint-Domingue, which is, of course, today Haiti. And so I had to start from a place of how do I untangle all of this misinformation, or which parts of this information can be discredited? Can any parts of this information be verified? And I realized that in my quest of sort of trying to find his baptismal certificate and or trying to find plantation records that might mention him, that I was kind of going about things a bit backwards, because that is what you would do for example, a white planter of the era whose birth and death would be recorded. But Henri Christophe, who was most likely enslaved at birth, wouldn't have those types of records. But one of the things he did when he became king was to commission historians to write his history down and to create almanacs. And these almanacs listed every member of the king's family and his household, his royal household, and his military, and ended up providing invaluable information. So I'm going to start there. The first image you're looking at on your screen is a little tiny excerpt from Baron de Vastey, who was Christophe's most important secretary, from his 1819 History of Haiti, which is in fact the first history of Haiti written by a Haitian. And it was published in 1819, and it was commissioned by the king, and is the only history of his life that the king commissioned that we know he would have read. And in that book, the Baron de Vastey tells us that Henri Christophe was born on the island of Grenada and is now 51 years old. And this is really important, this island of Grenada, so keep that in mind for a second. Also, the 51 years old, because it also matches what is in one of those royal almanacs, which is the second image you're looking at. It tells you His Majesty Henri, the King of Haiti, was born on October 6th, 1767, and married on June 2nd, 1811. I'm sorry, crowned June 2nd, 1811, and married on the 15th of July, 1793. So you can see already this very precious information. And then if you were to continue reading, it tells you the birth date of his wife. It tells you the birth dates of his children, his nephew, his niece. Is really, really valuable. And there are 6 different versions of this almanac. And I've actually digitized them with students, and they are on that website, lagazetteroyale.com, both as PDFs to be downloaded, but also we transcribed them so they are searchable, and have ended up becoming very important and useful to those trying to do their genealogy in Haiti. The last document you're looking at there also comes from Baron de Vastey's 1819 History of the Haitian Revolution, and clears up something else that was really written about and mentioned a lot, but hardly had any evidence to support it, or at least as it was presented from previous writers. And that is that Christophe fought in the American Revolutionary War at the Battle of Savannah, which happened in October 1779, when he would have been just 12 years old. And like all previous researchers into Christophe's life before me, I trekked down to the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah to try to find anything that would confirm some mention of this 12-year-old child being in this war. I went to France, to the French National Archives. I went to the papers of the general who led the battle, and I came up short until I realized once more I was going about it the wrong way. Christophe left us a record of his story that in fact matches stories that other eyewitnesses who wrote while he was alive in letters mentioned that the king had fought in the American Revolutionary War at the Battle of Savannah. So although we wouldn't find a service record for someone like Christophe, we have a lot of evidence that we just need to consider in a new light. And this is evidence essentially presented by the king himself through the printing press that he had control of, and writers whose works he commissioned. The Haitian American Historical Society clearly needed less convincing than I did, because in Franklin Square in Savannah, Georgia, sits a monument to what are called the chasseurs volontaires, who fought at the Battle of Savannah. And this is a body of free men of color from the island of Saint-Domingue, again today Haiti, who fought in this important battle that the American patriots and the French actually lose to the British. But it's a battle that does end up teaching Christophe some important things about warfare, even though he's only 12 years old and he is wounded in this battle. So that is one thing to consider as we move forward, is he's essentially a boy, he's a child, and this is one of his first introductions to the world away from the island of Grenada, which is the only island at that point we believe he'd ever called home. Christophe is portrayed on this monument as a drummer boy, because the French governor who basically created this corps, the chasseurs volontaires, had a provision that said that male children 12 years old could either be trumpeters or drummers. And so the Haitian American Historical Society chose to portray Christophe as a drummer. The monument, which I highly recommend visiting if you ever have the chance, is very interesting because it also provides some other information, including the names of others of the chasseurs volontaires who fought at the Battle of Savannah. And they include, for those who are sort of very into Haitian history, some very well-known names. There's Jean-Baptiste Marspellet, who was the first Black delegate to the French National Convention in the 18th century, once the French Republic had been declared after the French Revolution. We also have André Rigaud, who is, of course, the most famous and ardent rival of the very world-renowned Toussaint Louverture, so one of the most important generals of the Haitian Revolution. We have other individuals who fought in earlier revolts and rebellions, such as Jean-Baptiste Chavannes. And so the monument is not just a commemoration to these freedom fighters, but it also seeks to tell a little bit of their history. Now, you might be wondering, how would Christophe go from Grenada to Savannah? And again, this position of being in Grenada is really important because in this time period, we're talking about the 18th century, France and Great Britain and the other world powers are kind of constantly at war with one another. And after every war ends with a treaty, usually, they would trade around the islands of the Caribbean as if they were really kind of trading cards. And Grenada had actually been ceded to the British by the French in 1763. Well, Christophe was born in 1767, so it's in British hands at the time he's born. And I should mention Grenada is in the southern Caribbean, so about as far away from Saint-Domingue or Savannah, Georgia as you might get. But the French Count d'Estaing, who led the Battle of Savannah, just a few months before that, as a part of the American Revolutionary War's Caribbean theater, which is not talked about as much, he led a siege on the island of Grenada and he recaptured the island briefly for the French. And so this is in 1779. And what his papers tell us, the Count d'Estaing, is that they planted their flag, they made the governor of the island, resign, and they captured soldiers, they captured enslaved individuals, and they headed out to sea. And one of the first places they went was Saint-Domingue to restock their provisions before they headed out to Savannah, where they took those individuals they had captured from Grenada. Most likely our young Christophe finds himself there on that ship with them, and they go to North America and fight and lose at the Battle of Savannah. So a very interesting trajectory that does not end necessarily there, because Christophe obviously finds himself on the island of Saint-Domingue, which for him in some ways is probably the worst place he could have gone. Saint-Domingue at the time had the reputation of being the cruelest slave colony in the Atlantic world. Tortures were written about in legion form by travel writers, some of whom had been commissioned by the French crown to tell why there was such a high death rate in this colony. And when they would tell the truth about the cruelty of the French colonists, they would be fined, jailed, and their works pulled out of circulation. And yet, nevertheless, this is where Christophe finds himself. And in August 1791, this cruelty, the mass destruction of human life that is happening on this colony, where an African transported there from the continent would not live above 2 or 3 years, where the life expectancy for an African born on the island was only 15 or 16 years, and that's from those French naturalist sources again. Christophe, this would lead to natural rebellion in some ways. You also have to think about the fact that the French have forcibly transported between 1697, when they take over the western third of Hispaniola from the Spanish, until 1791, when the Haitian Revolution breaks out. They have forcibly transported nearly 900,000 captive Africans to this island. Now, in 1791, only about 465,000 captive Africans remain, and that includes the ones forcibly transported there and those born on the island, just to give you a massive sense of the scale of death that is happening on this island. And yet, captive enslaved Africans still outnumber the white French colonists, who are about 30,000, and the free people of color, who, according to various estimates, are about 28 to 35,000. And they could also be enslavers and planters as well. And yet the enslaved find a way to come together in the middle of August 1791 at what is called the Bois Caïman ceremony. And you're looking at a very famous image of it here by a contemporary Haitian painter named André Normil. And they talk about how they actually outnumber the enslavers, and that if they could just band together, they could overthrow the plantation system. And within 2 weeks, the enslaved Africans are setting fire to the sugar plantations. And of course, sugar is the most important crop in this colony, which is essentially the sugar capital of the Caribbean at the time. And they bring the plantation economy to an utter standstill. They have some help along the way. Various leaders sort of crop up, and one of them is the man I mentioned, Toussaint Louverture. Unlike Christophe, he was born on the island of Saint-Domingue. He was definitely enslaved at birth. Both of his parents were Africans from the continent. And so for most of his life, Toussaint Louverture had been enslaved. But actually, at the moment that the revolution breaks out, Toussaint Louverture already enjoyed his freedom. He had ingratiated himself to the family that had enslaved him. He'd been given increasing responsibilities. And by the time the revolution broke out, he actually had free status and in some ways became the natural leader of these enslaved Africans who were striving to achieve their own freedom. Christophe is around 1793 going to find himself in the orbit of Toussaint Louverture, and that's when his fortunes are really going to change for a time, because they essentially forced the French to take a drastic step in abolishing slavery. As I mentioned, the enslaved Africans are not working anymore. They have all but abolished slavery for themselves. And when the French sent commissioners to try to restore order, which is a constant euphemism for bringing this plantation economy back into its proper working order from their perspective, which means subjugating the enslaved again and forcing them to work, but they're not doing that anymore. They've already broken this system. And so these commissioners realize they have no choice. This is August, September, and October 1793, but to abolish slavery. The French National Convention, remember, the French have had a revolution, they've killed their king, they've declared a republic. The French National Convention in February 1794 does something astonishing to the world. They affirm this abolition and extend it to all French overseas territories. So now it is not just on the soil of metropolitan France that there can be no slaves, but technically anywhere in the French Republic. And yet, perhaps the story would have ended there, except for the fact that France is still in revolutionary turmoil, government after government, until we get to 1799, when a man named Napoleon Bonaparte helps to overthrow the Directory government, which had overthrown the previous revolutionary government. And he is established as first consul. And one of the first things he does is to change the French constitution to say that there can be different laws in metropolitan France from those that reign in the colony. And he is, in effect, paving the way for the reinstatement of slavery. In fact, when the island of Martinique is ceded back to the French from the British, because the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply in Martinique because the French had lost it at the Battle of Martinique to the British. So when the French regain it, again, those trading pieces, at the Treaty of Amiens, one of the first things that Bonaparte does is to sign into law in May 1802 a decree that says that slavery can remain on the island of Martinique. This is a huge problem, however. How can slavery be abolished elsewhere but persist in Martinique? What's Bonaparte's choice here? Well, he makes the choice to reinstate slavery on the island of Guadeloupe with the law of July 1802. Now, the Haitian revolutionaries, who from 1794 to 1802 are enjoying their lives as free Black French citizens, ostensibly. Toussaint Louverture becomes governor general of the island. Christophe is commander over the city of Cap Français in the north of Haiti, which is at the time the most important city perhaps in all of the Caribbean in terms of imports and exports. And they are living their lives as French citizens, and here comes Napoleon Bonaparte reinstating slavery elsewhere and sending a massive expedition to the island led by his brother-in-law, a man named General Leclerc, to kidnap Toussaint Louverture or arrest him, to turn all the other Black generals against one another, and to paved the way for the reinstatement of slavery on that island as well. And in fact, although Christophe won't know about it at the time, in April 1802, Bonaparte signs into law the reinstatement of the slave trade anywhere in the French Empire, explicitly also including Saint-Domingue. So it's very astonishing what he does. Now, if we go back to this massive expedition I mentioned, which is the largest expedition to ever set sail from France. Initially, it has 30,000 troops, and it will rise as high as 60 to 80,000 troops. When they initially try to land on Saint-Domingue, they have to contend with our Christophe. He is commander again over the city of Cap Français, and he tells Leclerc, you cannot land these troops here until I have an order from Toussaint Louverture. He is not recognizing Leclerc's authority, even as Leclerc insists he is sent there by Napoleon Bonaparte. Toussaint Louverture, unfortunately, is on the eastern side of the island, which had been ceded to the French in 1795 at the Treaty of Bâle. Just saying, if you feel like you can't keep up, it's because this territory changes hands multiple times and the other islands as well. So Toussaint Louverture, as governor general, he's on the eastern side of the island, attending to business there. And he has no knowledge of this massive fleet that arrives until Christophe informs him. Christophe sends his aide de camp. He says, Leclerc is threatening to land these troops, and do you want me to let them land? But the answer does not come quickly enough, because Leclerc begins issuing threats. He starts saying, I'll have you arrested. I'm going to land the troops on other parts of the island. And Christophe issues his own famous warning and threat. He tells Leclerc, if you realize these threats, I will resist as an officer general must, and you will only enter the city of Cap after having watched it be reduced to ashes. And even upon these ashes, I will fight you. For this obstinance, Christophe will be called by the French the arsonist of Cap, because he actually does make good on this threat. When he sees that Leclerc's troops have got the favorable wind and are heading towards the coast, he tells his troops to evacuate the city of women and children and to burn it down. And while the French may call him the arsonist, in Haiti, he has the reputation of being the protector. And so you're looking there at one contemporary painting, and you can see Christophe has his arms kind of outstretched, and the people are cheering him because he is trying to protect them from falling back under the yoke of slavery. And the other photograph is the statue of Henri Christophe as it sits on the Champ de Mars in Haiti's current capital, Port-au-Prince, today. But now you might imagine that things aren't going to necessarily have the happiest of endings here. The French are extremely upset. Christophe has had the most important city of theirs in this colony burned to the ground, essentially. And I should mention this is the second fire, and Christophe, as the commander over that city, had helped to rebuild it after the 1793 fire. So the French are extremely angry at all the money they've spent rebuilding this city, and that Christophe is the one who has ordered this, in their opinion, destruction. And so Leclerc issues a decree that says that General Toussaint and General Christophe are outlaws, and that every citizen is ordered to treat them as follows: rebels of the French Republic. Now, Christophe and Toussaint Louverture and a man named Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the founder of independent Haiti, and other previously French generals, Black French generals, are going to initially fight Leclerc's troops. They start fighting them. But Leclerc, he has his own tactics. He tries to once more put into that plan of, let's see if I can turn these generals against one another. And realizing how popular Christophe is, he in a sense starts there. He convinces Christophe that he has no desire to bring back slavery, and Christophe takes a meeting with him, and he ends up putting down his arms. This leads to Toussaint Louverture deciding to put down his arms as well. He retires to one of his plantations. the French tried to lure him or pacify him by saying, you can retain your rank in the French army as long as you stop fighting us. But Toussaint Louverture doesn't trust them. He's pretty angry with Christophe because Christophe's defection to the French has led to other defections. And Toussaint says, I'm tired now, I'm going home to my plantations. But the French do not believe that he has actually resigned, that he's actually in retirement. They continue to spread rumors that he is causing unrest among the previously enslaved population and inciting them to rebel. And so Leclerc, along with one of his main generals, hatches a plan to lure Toussaint Louverture down to the city, or up to the city of Cap, I should say, and to have him arrested. And Louverture is very reluctant to meet with them. He doesn't trust them, but he ultimately decides to agree to a meeting, and he is summarily arrested, deported to France, locked up in the Fort du Joux prison, which is near the borders of Switzerland, where his cell was frequently freezing. He suffered a stroke that went untreated, even though his jailers knew he needed medical attention. They deprived him of water, sunlight. They took his clock, took his military uniform, didn't provide him wood for his cell, and he ended up dying a terrible death on April 7th, 1803. Now, the French had actually tried to hide the information about what had happened to Toussaint Louverture because they knew that this would just further inflame rebellion on Saint-Domingue, and particularly among the French Black generals like Christophe, who only kind of had tentatively decided to yoke their fates to the French army. But one rogue French newspaper reports Toussaint Louverture's death at the end of April 1803. It's very quickly followed by the Times of London on May 2nd, 1803. The information then travels to the United States by early June 1803, and we know that likely around that exact same time is when that information reaches Saint-Domingue. And within a couple of months, all the Black French generals have defected. Now they are fighting against the French, not just to keep slavery from being reinstated, but they have changed their motto from liberty or death to independence or death. They understand what's happened in Martinique, they know what's happened in Guadeloupe, and they are determined not to let it happen on the island of Saint-Domingue. Leclerc, however, is also determined. The French Minister of the Marine and Napoleon Bonaparte are exceedingly impatient with him. Why is it taking so long? Your counterpart on Guadeloupe didn't encounter this much trouble. And so Leclerc writes home. Shortly before his death, he'll be dead by the beginning of the next month, and says that he needs authorization to use what we would consider today to be genocidal tactics. He says we have to destroy all the Blacks in the mountains, men and women, and spare only the children under 12 years of age. We must destroy half of those in the plains and must not leave a single colored person in the colony who has worn an epaulette. The tactics they use are horrific. Drownings, mass drownings, suffocation with sulfur gas in the holds of ships, dog attacks, and those who wrote home, including British soldiers, the British had invaded the island at one point, American merchants, talked about the stench from the bay. Even French soldiers, many of whom ended up defecting later, these are white French soldiers from the metropole, wrote about these terrible tactics and about how they had nightmares about them. And so this was really a horrible time in Haitian history that only further pushed the previously Black French generals to want independence. It sharpened their resolve. It made them fight for their lives and for the lives of all the people on the island. And in fact, at the famous Congress of Arcaillé in May 1803, this is the moment when, led by now Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the Haitian revolutionaries say, the only choice for us is to be free and independent from France. And Dessalines reportedly rips the white out of the French tricolor, and a woman named Catherine Fland, depicted here in this very beautiful image, sews the two sides back together, which creates what is now the contemporary Haitian flag, red and blue with no white in the middle. This fighting continues, even though Leclerc dies in November 1802. His successor, General Rochambeau, is even more determined to defeat the Black freedom fighters, and yet he loses. On November 18th, 1803, the Haitian revolutionaries defeat the French at the famous battle at Vertières, and within 1 month, they are declaring the island not just free of slavery forever, which they do, but also independent of France, and they changed the name of the island from Saint-Domingue to Haiti. January 1st, 1804 is celebrated as the official Haitian Independence Day, and now these revolutionaries have to figure out how to govern this colony, who should lead them, and what kind of state formation they should take. And so under the reign of Dessalines, who at first takes the title of Governor General, which is the title Toussaint Louverture held, they eventually decide to create an empire. And so Dessalines takes the title of the Emperor Jacques I at the end of 1804. And for a brief time, what we have is the Empire of Haiti. They issue a constitution in May 1805 that reiterates that slavery is forever abolished. And now another tragedy is going to strike. But before I get to this second tragedy, I want to talk about what Christophe is doing at this moment. Dessalines has made him general-in-chief of the Haitian army, but he has also made another man from the south, his eventual rival, a division general, and given him command over the western part of Haiti, which includes the city of Port-au-Prince. This turns out to be a mistake. On October 17th, 1806, Pétion, led by a band of conspirators from the south and from the west of Haiti, orchestrate a plot to overthrow Dessalines that results in the assassination of the emperor on what is called the Pont Rouge, which is just outside of Port-au-Prince. This leads to a civil war because initially these conspirators tried to convince Christophe to take the helm of the government. They say, you're general-in-chief of the Haitian army, people know you, they trust you, we'll create a new constitution, we'll become the Republic of Haiti, and you will lead us as our president. And Christophe initially goes along with this until he starts to really understand that he would be getting into bed, so to speak, with the very people who have killed the previous emperor, the previous ruler. And if they can do that to him, what might they do? What might they do to Christophe should he displease them? And so Christophe flees to the north, where he's from, to the now renamed city of Cap-Haïtien. No more Cap Français, now it's Cap-Haïtien. And he sets up a different state in northern Haiti. So this is February 1807. And he takes the title, which I always say is a very modest title, of President and Generalissimo of the Forces of the Earth and Seas of the state of Haiti. But Alexandre Pétion is dead set on creating a republic. So while Christophe fashions the part he rules as a state, Pétion wants a republic, and in fact, he becomes president of a simultaneous republic. The country is split in two. This is in the north, or this is in the south of Haiti. So if you think of the city of Port-au-Prince and just up a little bit past Croix-des-Bouquets, that is the Republic of Haiti, and the rest is going to be the state of Haiti, and then of course, eventually, the Kingdom of Haiti. I should mention that these two sides of Haiti do not just exist simultaneously in harmony. They are actually physically fighting each other, each one trying to take over the territory of the other. And in fact, this internecine fighting is what leads Christophe's counselors of state to nominate him to take the title of king in March 1811, and Christophe is crowned on June 2nd, 1811. And this image depicts Father Corneille Brel, a French priest from Brittany who was Christophe's very good friend, crowning him. And in fact, Brel did crown him at that ceremony on that day. His wife and children, of course, become the queen and the princesses and the prince of Haiti, and we'll get to meet them in just a moment. People always ask me, why would Christophe become a king? But of course, we have to remember he is in some senses a king in a world of kings. One of the reasons that Christophe was ardently opposed to a republic turns out to be very interesting. In the North, they cite the fact that the only two examples of modern republics they had at that time in the world were the United States and France, which were republics where people proclaimed liberty and equality for all while continuing to enslave. Remember, slavery is reinstated in French overseas territories, where it will continue until the French formally abolish it in 1848, going into effect in 1849. The United States, of course, I don't have to remind us, all the way up until the end of the Civil War, 1865. So for them, it is not a natural thing to create this republic, which seems like a smokescreen for inequality. But they do have a sort of funny justification. They say, we want to be like the magnanimous Great Britain. They cite Great Britain's abolition of the slave trade in 1807, slave trade, not slavery, and say that they are the most enlightened on earth, which I would wonder how those enslaved in Jamaica and the British colonies might feel about that. But nevertheless, that is the title that Christophe takes from 1811 forward. He will have a vast nobility. And the world reacted to this as you might expect, in a kind of racist way. The first image you're looking at there is a broadside, an Italian broadside that circulated widely after 1813, and it kind of depicts Christophe in this ridiculous manner with these ridiculous clothings, and the text that accompanies it is even more ridiculous. But Christophe by this time is extremely powerful. He's gotten the plantation economy worked by free labor ostensibly back up and running. Their main export is not sugar now, it's coffee. Their greatest trading partner is Great Britain. And so he doesn't seem to be too worried about these caricatures, although he does mention them at times. What he does and how he responds to it is to commission British and German painters to come to the kingdom and paint his likeness as he would have it. And so you're looking at one of the most famous images of Christophe there, which is the portrait painted by Richard Evans, a notable portraitist from England, who, headed up the Academy of Painting and Drawing that Christophe set up in the capital and lived in Haiti for a time and painted both Christophe and his youngest son. The middle image is a more contemporary attempt to sort of play with the Italian image done by the Haitian painter Edouard Duval-Carrier. And its title is very interesting, Only Christophe or the Last Dance of the Taino, because of course the Taino is the name by which the indigenous population of Haiti is known. And Christophe had a deep veneration for the indigenous population and often likened himself to the cacique Enriquillo, who had, in the 16th century, created a kind of maroon state to protect him and his band from Spanish invaders. And that maroon state persisted for quite some time. And so this was an individual Christophe very much admired. Now, although some in the world did poke fun at the idea that Christophe would become a king, the world was also simultaneously fascinated by how is he going to take this island that was run by slave labor and turn it into an island run by free labor. And so they began to reprint his codes of law. So Christophe's famous code of law from 1812 is called the Code Henri. And these laws, along with others, were reprinted as they were revised over the years. His Constitution of 1807, his Constitution of 1811, the Code Henri in 1812, and they appeared in Spain, in Mexico, in the United States, in Philadelphia. The world is kind of watching. And in fact, back in Great Britain, he's getting a lot of praise. The British naturalist Joseph Banks says this is the most moral and free association of men in existence because it is supposed to allow the laborers on farms to enjoy 1/4 the products of their labor. 1/4 the profits are supposed to be shared among the laborers. Now, whether that happened in fact rather than in theory is something that we continue to debate, but the world nevertheless is watching how these laws and the decrees are trying to set up a free Black kingdom in a world of slavery. They are surrounded by slave colonies, and their powerful neighbor to the north, the United States, was of course overrun with slavery in the part closest to them, which is the southern US. Christophe was also renowned for the artwork that was coming out of his kingdom. So it was not just the Academy of Painting and Drawing that would yield what you'll see in a moment, a very famous image of his palace, but also the book that created the nobility, this sort of heraldry, had coats of arms for every member of Christophe's aristocracy. And so you're looking at Christophe's coat of arms there. And of course, it's got his famous phoenix that says "Je renais de mes cendres," I'm born from my ashes, on the bottom of this phoenix kind of bursting from the flames. And on the bottom part of the ribbon, God is my cause and my sword. And the queen had her own coat of arms. His children had their own coat of arms. And we also find this coat of arms atop every issue of the Royal Gazette of Haiti, the Gazette Royale d'Haïti, which is the newspaper. Again, if you would like to read it, that website, lagazetteroyale.com, we have all the newspapers transcribed and digitized there. The final image here is it's a commemorative coin from 2004 from the UNESCO commemorating the 200th anniversary of Haitian independence back in 2004. Christophe was, yes, admired for his laws. He's admired for the iconography and the culture he's building. He's also admired for the architecture of this kingdom. You're looking here at the Citadelle La Ferrière, called the Citadelle Henri in his day. It is today a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is widely considered to be the eighth wonder of the world. That's often how it's described by visitors from whether the 19th or the 20th century. And it is the largest fortress in North America. It was vast, or is vast like a city. It had its own printing press, pharmacy. It could house 30,000 troops. It had enough stores of food to feed 10,000 people in the village below, in case the French tried to reinvade, which I might add they frequently did during Christophe's reign, especially after Napoleon was forced to abdicate his throne, both the first and the second time. The French king, the Bourbon Louis XVIII, repeatedly tries to plan expeditions, send spies to the kingdom to try to prepare the way, again, for that euphemism, to restore Saint-Domingue, which means to restore French authority and also to bring back slavery. The kingdom was also had a thriving culture of literature. So many of their pamphlets were directed at destroying the system of slavery. And British abolitionists would have them translated and printed in London, and they would circulate all around. So you find reviews of these abolitionist pamphlets in the US press. You find mentions of them in sympathetic French accounts, sometimes a French apologist trying to destroy them. But they also produced literature, poems, operas, plays. And so you're looking at the front page of one of these operas, written by a man named Juste Chanlat, who was the Comte de Rosier. That's his his title of nobility. And it's called The Hunting Party of the King. And it is first performed on January 1st, 1820, in the final year of Christophe's reign. And as a literarily trained person, I cannot help but to read a little bit of foreshadowing here, because this is again the year of the king's death. And at one point in this opera, the king goes missing and everyone thinks that he's dead. Now, of course, this is a romance play, so at the end, he's not. He's rescued, and then it finishes with a wedding, like any good romance play. But I sort of wonder about those in the audience, what they might be thinking about, what might be going through their head as this sort of play or the opera unfolds and the king is missing for quite some time and thought to be dead. And the reason I say that is because while the king, his nobility, anyone of means, all the foreigners and teachers and doctors who've traveled to the kingdom of Haiti and are living the kind of high life, while they are all partying and having a great time, the people of Haiti are in fact working. The Citadelle, you saw the image, takes a massive labor force. And I like how Jacques Richard Chéry tried to capture this in this 1962 portrait. And at the same time, maybe as they are working, they would watch one of Christophe's opulent carriages roll by. He had more than a dozen carriages, all ordered from England, and they would be written about in foreign newspapers, information transmitted back home to various countries by ship captains and merchants saying, these are some of the most opulent and beautiful carriages you'll ever see. They wrote about the dresses of the princesses. They wrote about the palace at Sans-Souci and how magnificent it was with its garden and its irrigation system and all the parties that are happening there. And you think the people of Haiti might start to wonder, well, why can I not partake in all of this glory, especially since it's their labor on the coffee plantations that is producing the export that is enriching a small number of the Haitian people. And so here you're looking at your screen at several renditions or two paintings of the palace at Sans-Souci, meaning without worry in French, which is in Milo, Haiti, which is a tiny little hamlet near Cap Haïtien called Cap Henri in Christophe's day. And the first one was done by a teenage painter named Numa Desroches, who had attended that Academy of Painting and Drawing. And the middle one is by a German painter later in into the 19th century. And the final image is a photograph taken in 2020 that shows the palace as it stands today in ruins because it was partially and catastrophically destroyed by a May 1842 earthquake that estimates are it was a magnitude 8.1, and its tremors were felt as far away as New Orleans and Arkansas. Just to give you a sense of what it was, even there today, it's still magnificent to stand on the double flanked staircase, to stand in the Hall of Mirrors, and to look out and to think that this was a site of opulence and wealth, and it was also at the same time a sort of image of brutality for those who had to work on it. I mentioned that Christophe had a wife and children. These are his three remaining children. He had an older son who died in Paris quite tragically in 1805, and he had an even older son from a previous relationship, Prince Eugène, who is not considered one of the royal children because it was not his child who he had with his wife. But nevertheless, we have Victor Henri here, who's the heir to the throne and is actually the youngest, and Améthyste and Athénée, his older sisters. This is a more contemporary image from 1978 trying to depict Christophe's court. It has one of the only attempts from the more recent days to portray Queen Marie-Louise. We don't actually have any images from the era of Marie-Louise as we do the Christophe children and Christophe himself. So more contemporary artists have been forced to try to imagine and try to include her in their renditions. And I'd say most recently, Fiorle Baez, the Dominican Haitian artist, has tried to do this with this installation called For Marie-Louise Croix David, Exiled Keeper of Order. And the last part of it, once more, is quite interesting, Ana Caona, because of course Ana Caona was the cacique queen of Zaragua near the city of Leogan in the indigenous period. And so again, that sort of merging of contemporary or this kind of royal kingdom with the past of the indigenous kingdoms on the island previous to Spanish and French invasion. But like all good things, and I truly hope all bad things, think this reign would come to an end. In August 1820, Christophe suffered a stroke at a church in Limonade, and afterwards he was reportedly paralyzed on one side. He lost consciousness for a bit. His doctor, Duncan Stewart, who was a Scotsman, was able to revive him, but it was very clear that Christophe was paralyzed on one side. And during his convalescence, a plot forms among the nobility. There's a conspiracy to overthrow him. And so when Christophe sort of seems to miraculously get better by the end of September 1820, he returns to the capital, but the plot is too far gone. And it takes a while for Christophe to be convinced that the plot is actually happening. And by the time he recognizes it, it's too late. All the troops he sends to quash the rebellion end up joining the rebellion. And for the first time in the city of Cap Henri, you can hear Vive la République, which is the southern part, remember, still divided Haiti, which would have gotten you shot or jailed for sure under Christophe's heyday. And now you hear this chanted in the streets. And so on the night of October 8th, 1820, Christophe asks Duncan Stewart, the doctor, where his heart is, and he takes a pistol and he shoots himself. Afterward, Christophe's wife and children carry his body up to the citadel. They bury it in lime. They try to prevent the body from being desecrated. So Christophe actually never has a proper funeral, as is depicted in this famous painting by Philomé Aubin. The Aubins were a famous family of painters from northern Haiti. And so I like to think of this painting as being more about reconciliation. You see that Christophe's tomb is there covered in the red and blue flag of contemporary Haiti instead of the red and black flag, which was the flag that Christophe used, as if to say, the northern and southern parts of Haiti must remain unified. And it's also interesting that this painting is created during the Duvalier era, a time when Duvalier had been using the red and black flag that Christophe and Dessalines had used in their empire and kingdom, respectively. Before I end, I have to say, I can't leave the story there, because what happens to Haiti after Christophe's death is just as important, if not more important, than what happened previous to it. A man named Jean-Pierre Boyer, who had succeeded Pétion in the South. Pétion had died in March 1818. And instead of being a moment where the two sides of Haiti were reunified, the Southerners elect Boyer. He becomes the new president of the Republic. He starts fighting Christophe. But now with Christophe gone, Boyer is able to reconcile the north and south of Haiti into one republic. And in fact, by 1822, he brings the eastern side, the part that's now the Dominican Republic, into Haiti. And the whole island is the Republic of Haiti for more than 20 years under his reign. But during that time, he's going to make a catastrophic mistake. He really wants French recognition of Haitian independence, something no other country was willing to offer. Not even Great Britain, Haiti's greatest trading partner. Certainly not the United States, not even the Emperor of Russia, who's also trading with Haiti. And so when Louis XVIII's brother and successor, Charles X, comes to power in 1824, and then in 1825 offers to finally relinquish French hold on Saint-Domingue, their imaginary hold, and to formally recognize Haitian independence, but at the price of 150 million francs, Boyer catastrophically agrees. He closes down the schools, he stops work on roads and hospitals, and changes the laws of Haiti to make every citizen who's not in the nobility a laborer. And this sets Haiti on a current path of debt to France as the country is forced to take out extreme loans to pay down this debt of independence. And so when people say to me, what do you think is Christophe's most important legacy? I always say it's opposing this debt. We could cite the Citadelle, the Palace at Sanssouci, the plays, the schools, the national school system he's creating for boys and girls, the Mathematical Academy, the Academy of Painting and Drawing, the one about music. And yet the most important thing that he had was foresight. This idea of an indemnity was repeatedly floated during his rule, and he issued his ministers to return one answer to the French, inadmissible. When British abolitionists Thomas Clarkson tried to convince him, just agree to pay them and get them off your back, he says, no way. If anyone owes anybody money, they owe us money for all the work of enslaved Africans for more than a century. They are the ones who owe us. And so I say his greatest legacy is understanding that a country that is indebted to freedom can never be truly free. Thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I just posted in the chat. We don't have any questions there yet, but if anybody in our audience has any questions, they can post them in the chat. I know that sometimes people have sent us messages later and said they had trouble finding the chat or they weren't sure. However you want to, if you can't find the chat, please feel free to send us an email or something, and we'll try to bring questions forward as best we can. I'm gonna a little bit start the ball rolling with maybe a very broad question, because I'm fascinated by almost the dichotomy of this king, where on the one hand, like you were sort of talking about the refusing these reparations and building schools and all these things, and then at the other side, sort of this opulence where you're describing building the palace of laborers while he's traveling in his carriages. And so I guess at a very simple level, at the time, was he a popular king? Was he seen as a very good king? Were the people willing to overlook this opulence? Was he just popular? Was he a good king?
So it's a sort of difficult question to answer, right? Because they have this printing press and they control the newspapers. And so they'll write, oh, the king would do these tours of the whole kingdom where he would go and he would talk to the people. And then the newspapers would write, and these are all people employed by Christophe. Everywhere he went, they said, "Vive le roi, vive la famille royale," and so one of his detractors in the South would say, "You can't judge, whether or not people actually love their king by whether they're chanting this, because what are they going to do? Say, "Ah, bah le roi," like down with the king," which is what they were saying in that period after when they were overthrowing him. They were certainly saying that. But one measure that does give us some sense is that Christophe, there were small revolts and rebellions during his reign. And they were, you know, as you might imagine, from the laboring class, like people getting upset about the laboring conditions. But one of Christophe's responses to this was to open up the land grant program that he had instituted, which had previously really only benefited the military and the nobility. And this is the program where he's going to assign to people the former plantations. And so they would be the farmer and they would get to keep 1/4 of the profits. 1/4 was supposed to go to the upkeep of the plantation, 1/4 to the kingdom, and then 1/4 for all the laborers who work on it to share. And you know, the taxes, there was high rate of taxation, however, so people complained about that high rate of taxation. And so around 1817, he creates these reforms and he allows anyone in the kingdom, if they have the means to keep up a plantation, to be able to get these leases. So it's like he sort of realizes that you can't have a place that's this ripe with inequality because it will just remind people of like a fiefdom in a feudal era, or it'll remind people of the plantation era under the French. And so I always say, you know, was he a good king or a bad king? He was a king in formation, making a lot of mistakes and mistakes that were harming people, and it can't be excused. But I do wonder what would have happened had he continued along, since he did seem open to change and to recognizing that, you know, you can't work people to the bone this way. And in fact, the doctor who was with him the day he died and who had revived him, Duncan Stewart, he left behind a lot of letters and wrote quite a bit about his time with the king. And he said something really interesting. He said, you know, I was with him until his final days, and he did realize that he had been too harsh with the people, and he did regret it. And this doctor has, you know, Christophe's gone. He has no reason really to want to make stuff up, because plenty of other people who knew him and lived there and benefited from him started writing screeds about him and lore. He threw babies out of windows and things. But really, the most kind of credible accounts don't say those kind of things. They say he just worked people too hard. He expected too much. And he expected too much because he had a very paternalistic attitude. He would say, I am protecting you. Without me, the French are coming. And every time the French did try to come, they would publicize it in the newspapers and they would say, see, without us, what would you be? Like, let's go and get those cannonballs up to the citadel for safekeeping, you know?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there for a second. That's fascinating. Just this idea of you know, escaping enslavement and then um, not really being the golden world we sort of assume it's going to be. You know, sort of this happily ever after. But yeah, that's fascinating. I also I noted down a question about the Constitution because I'm fascinated by sort of more than one, as you said, but sort of this series of constitutions. And I wonder if you've spent much time sort of comparing and contrasting because I'm fascinated how they might thinking particularly about the sort of the early French constitutions, and obviously one major difference, but if they're very similar with this idea of liberty and very similar rights, or is it really sort of striking out on their own in their own direction? Sort of was there did it seem to be sort of taking ideas from other countries, or was it very much a unique constitution?
Yeah, these constitutions are extremely unique because they're the only constitutions anywhere in the world that explicitly ban slavery. They don't use any euphemisms. They don't say, like, if you contrast it with the US Constitution, for example, it doesn't say like 3/5 of all other persons, you know, like, or the French, when they re-signed slavery back into law, they'll say, like, we're putting back into place the laws that existed before 1789, you know, like they would not try to say the thing. But from Toussaint Louverture to Dessalines to Christophe and even Pétion and Boyer, it says slavery is abolished, and they have like all these clauses, servitudes, like all the euphemisms they know that people use for slavery, like all these things cannot happen. Everyone is equal before the law. You cannot the only distinctions that can be recognized are virtues and talents. That's the only thing they get from France, like Voltaire. It's like a Voltaire phrase, right? So you can recognize people for what they can do, but you can't recognize them for who they are. They ban it under Dessalines. They ban color prejudice. all of Haiti's early constitutions ban conquest. And in fact, if you look at British and US reactions to these constitutions, they're like, oh my gosh, they outlawed empire. Like they don't want to expand their territories. Like it's like they can't imagine because the US wants to expand, expand, expand. And then of course all the European powers, that's all they've been doing for like centuries. And so they said they just want to like have this little corner of the earth. And later, when in fact the United States starts trying to encroach on the port of Mont Saint Nicolas or the Bay of Samana in the east, Haitians will respond by saying, we just want to have like this little corner of the world. Can we just have this little tiny corner of the world? And you've got a whole continent over there, like stay over there. And it's very interesting to me that the things that they wanted to do were ban slavery, racism, and colonialism. I mean, it makes sense after all they had experienced. To them, those were the greatest evils of the world. And if you could just outlaw them, they envisioned that the world would be a more harmonious place. In fact, I should mention, when I mentioned that France and Great Britain, of course, are constantly at war, at one point when Christophe is general-in-chief of the army and he writes to Dessalines and they say, these people are so murderous, maybe they're just going to eliminate each other from the earth and then we won't have to worry about them like trying to invade us anymore. So they say they can't understand it. How can they strike a treaty one day and then the next day somebody breaks the treaty? And of course, those breaking of the treaties has enormous consequences for Haiti because the British are blockading the ports and the seas and not letting French ships by. And as soon as they strike a treaty with France, every single time the French come. That's what happened during the Leclerc expedition. There was the peace of Amiens between France and Great Britain, and then here comes Napoleon's troops. So they fear these treaties, but they actually start hoping for war. They're like, maybe they'll just destroy each other and then they'll both be gone, It's striking to think from their perspective, them watching this and saying, why, what is with this constant wanting to have a war? After everything they've been through, it really is kind of striking when you think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of eye-opening perspective. Never really having thought of it that way. I wonder if I mean you already talked about this, but I wonder if you would mind really underscoring one point you made earlier about just the number of captured and enslaved continental Africans that, like, I think the number you said was 900,000, and
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling. I'm wondering if you could just repeat that number just to sort of
Yeah.
underscore.
Yeah, so the French formally take over the Western Third in 1697 at the Treaty of Ryswick. And from that time, 1697, to the outbreak of revolution in 1791, on French ships alone, this doesn't count the other flags, because then the number rises. The French forcibly transport more than 900,000, and they land a little bit less than 900,000, because that just shows you tens of thousands die at sea. And those are the ones they, in that 100 years, brought. But in that 100 years, there were also there were enslaved Africans born on the island, enslaved by the French planters. They were born there. And so the numbers are astonishing. And then when you add in the other flags, the number of forcibly transported Africans in that same time period is 1.3 million. So 400,000 about from the other world powers combined, the Dutch and Spanish and the British. And and when you look at French numbers to their other colonies, Martinique and Guadeloupe, it's way, way less, like 100,000, 200,000, way, way less, which is still a lot because these are tiny little islands, but their operation here is truly mind-boggling. And in fact, when I read the famous newspaper called the Les Affiches Américaines, is the most kind of well-known and popular newspaper from the 18th century in the colony, they catalog the ships that are coming. And I remember reading on one ship, I thought, this has to be a typo. They said this ship landed, had 4,000 captive Africans. I'm thinking, this is crazy. That's insane. Then another ship said 800, another 1,200. And this is all in one day, like these different ships coming to the port. And so I'm doing this calculation going, how could this possibly be? This is a massive amount of human beings. It's almost it's unimaginable. I can't even picture it,
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, 4,000 is hard to imagine, let alone almost 900,000 over this time. And you start to understand why it seems like Haiti is um, Haiti is a flashpoint, but also if you look at people who are pushing for abolition, it's the stories about Haiti that sort of drive, well, not Haiti at that point, but drive them to that, right? It's just, it's so, it's just in the midst of this awfulness, it's on another level, and it's just unbelievable. But it also gives you just the scale is unbelievable, and you know when. Yeah, it's it's just wow. So I should before I turn it back over to Tom, we always like to say if you make sure you we have some comments in the chat talking about your book as well. So we'll make sure to put your book, but also that link if that's all right, if we can put it on the description of the video, because I'm sure anybody that will watch us will want to make sure they do that. And again, just before I turn it over to Tom, I just want to say a huge thank you. This has been fascinating, but also your passion for this subject really comes through loud and clear through the camera. So it's very much appreciated. This was fascinating. It was wonderful listening to you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Okay.
And before we cut you loose, I have a couple quick questions. The losses are so monumental. Is it because of the cruelty, the danger of the farming practices, or like Haiti was also renowned for the Europeans for malaria, yellow fever, and the deaths from disease as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of factors, pretty much all of them kind of sadistic, to use the words of the of those who wrote about it. Again, even the Europeans. So sugar cultivation is extremely dangerous. The refining process with these kind of windmills that they had and water mills, people would get limbs and arms stuck, and this was written about a lot. Planters sometimes poisoned the people on their plantations to collect insurance money. The tortures and terrors, I don't even want to describe them, but if you really want to read them, you could read the Baron de Vastey's book, The Colonial System Unveiled. He was from a family of free people of color, and these were his neighbors, and he's sort of giving more than accounts of more than 100 different forms of torture that the enslavers used. And and then they just worked them so hard in the sun. And yes, there was tetanus. People would get tetanus. Babies would die from tetanus frequently, or mothers didn't have milk because they were malnourished. There were several grain crises over the course of the French rule. And of course, the enslavers kept, when there was food, the food for themselves. And so people starved. I mean, it's really quite horrific, because when you read the French naturalist account, they suggest, well, if you just kind of treated them as people who need water and food and medical care, then you could stop this. And then the particular account I'm thinking of, Hilaire de Bertoy, he gets thrown into prison. His book is pulled out of circulation and he gets fined. Even though he was sent there by Louis XVI to try to tell him how they could make the death rate less, to make the colony more profitable, even though it was already extremely profitable, even with all of this death and destruction, which is another thing that constantly astonishes me, is that the people who are around this, watching it, what does that do to the human psyche? You must have to become very numb and inured to humanity to just kind of keep acquiring more and more captive Africans to enslave when you're watching, them basically die right before your eyes.
Mind-boggling. And then a final question. You mentioned Boyer promised reparations to France, or that debt. Do I understand it right? Does that still exist today? Is Haiti still struggling to repay that?
That's a great question. So this, in 1825, yes, he signs a decree saying that Haiti will pay France 150 million francs as not reparations really, but compensation to the former colonists for the loss of their property. So a kind of reparations, but they don't use that word.
Yeah.
And then they are forced to take out loans to pay the first two installments, and then, which is 30 million francs, and then they default quickly after. Then the French, now we have a new French king, Louis Philippe, sends more warships to Haiti. And I should mention that the first time there were warships. So it wasn't like Boyer just said, okay, I'll sign this. There are all these warships. The French are threatening all kinds of things like, we'll blockade the ports, we'll starve you to death, we'll invade. I mean, they're saying all these things. And even though some economists say, well, French really wouldn't have done that. Well, Boyer doesn't necessarily know that, right? And so when Louis Philippe comes, they strike a new treaty. They say, okay, you paid 30 million. We'll reduce the amount you owe to 60 million francs, but you have to use these French banks and you have to take out more loans, and they're at exorbitant interest rates. And in fact, there are multiple projects studying those banks, which still exist today, iterations and subsidiaries still exist today, and about whether or not they can and should owe reparations to Haiti for this kind of unjust debt imposed. So the Haitians end up technically repaying France in the 1880s, but the problem is that in order to finish paying France, they take out more loans from the United States and Germany. And so now they've borrowed from Peter to pay Paul, and they'd already borrowed to pay. And now the US is involved, and now Germany is involved. And so this kind of directly leads to the US occupation. The United States is going to impound all Haitian government revenue because they want to make sure Haiti doesn't default on these debts for that they owe to the National Bank of New York, which is today Citibank is a derivative of that. And so technically, according to present economists, because of that, Haiti doesn't finish paying until 1957. But economists in Haiti say that if you really think about it, because of all the subsequent debts contracted, you really can't unfold the money anymore, like to see when it stopped, unless you wipe out all of Haiti's debt, because there are so many subsequent debts. And there's also just loans taken out to pay for other things that couldn't be paid for because all the money was going to France, then the United States and Germany. So it's a really a morass of trying to untangle who would owe Haiti if, in fact, reparations were to be paid to the country.
And then Haiti remains desperately poor and probably because of the weight of all this debt, had just never been able to develop and evolve. Right?
Absolutely. In fact, the New York Times, when they did their kind of famous expose, I think it was in 2022, they described how the Eiffel Tower was financed with money from these banks that had enriched themselves from the money from Haiti. And so it's literally like French opulence and like their glory, and like the thing they're most known for, the Eiffel Tower, is related to this debt. And in fact, when you think about slavery, France wouldn't be France today without slavery, just like Great Britain wouldn't be Great Britain. The United States wouldn't be the United States, because that is what financed the building of infrastructure and the economy, and then the boom in the Industrial Revolution, and that this money was generational wealth accumulated, transported into the railroad industry, that you really can pull apart. Every single thing is related to this the slave economy that these countries had instituted.
One last question snuck in there, and my monitor's blacked out. Here we go. Scarlett's asking, you mentioned New York. She's a history student here in New York. There's so many Haitian artifacts here. Is that how some of those ended up in New York?
Oh, like in museums and things? Yes and no. I mean, some in the archives were unscrupulous kind of travelers to Haiti, stole documents, and then they ended up in libraries and archives in New York and elsewhere in Great Britain as well. They've got like drums from the era of the US occupation. They've got all kinds of sacred objects from voodoo rituals, things that they took. And so, yeah, the history of sort of museum and archival library acquiring is not great when it comes to Haiti, as it isn't usually when it comes to places that have been previously colonized. Because think about it, if they have the perspective that people don't even have the right to their land or their body, then they also have the perspective they don't have the right to their documents and to their things. And the French archives actually are the most filled with all kinds of things from Haiti that you don't even find in Haiti. You know, if you read my book and you read the footnotes, you'll see the vast majority of the archives, libraries, and historical sites I visited where they had documents are outside of Haiti. Very few in Haiti, because after Christophe's reign, those foreigners plundered the palace. The Armorial of Haiti, which is where that coat of arms I showed you is from, it's housed at the Royal College of Arms in London. This is the only place in the world where the original of that book with the original drawings exists. On my website, lagazetteroyale.com, where I have all the newspapers and the almanacs digitized, I say the provenance where each one came from. And I'm sad to say many of them came from Beinecke Rare Manuscripts Library right here at Yale, and from the New York Public Library, from the University of California, Santa Barbara, from the National Archives of the UK, from Denmark. I mean, it's everywhere but in Haiti. I have one issue that was found in a Haitian library, one issue of Christophe's newspaper.
Well, like always, we could probably go on all night, but we have to cut this off at some point. So, Marlene, thank you. And then to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your ongoing support. Remember, on your way out, if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, then that helps us immensely. We'll talk to you